Morning. We have a rather small group. I'm talking in front of all these empty chairs and tables. Wow. Everybody's over in Brian and Gabe's session, right? Probably, as always. My name is Mike Nelson. This is my 2008, this is my 5th BriForum, my second one over here in London. And I work for a company called Nginx. And you may have seen one of my colleagues give a presentation yesterday, Rick Dillinger. I work with Rick. And another gentleman named Henrik Johansson. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he is also a speaker and an expert. You can reach me at any of this contact information right here, the Twitter or the email, if you have any questions. How many the first time to BriForum? Is everyone enjoying themselves so far? Is it what you expected? Good, good. I have to say it's much more personable than going to Tech Ed or going to MMS or something like that, where you literally have 200 people in a room, where this you have about 20 people in a room and you can talk to people, and the amount of knowledge that's shared amongst the people is just phenomenal. BriForum is something really special to us and the folks that put it on. So, and of course, it wouldn't be possible without the wonderful people of TechTarget that help us out. So, anyways, what we're here to talk about is the clash of the client-side hypervisors, Windows 8 HyperV, client HyperV, and VMware Workstation. How many folks are using either one today, VMware Workstation? How many use client Hyper-V? A couple of you already. Good. A couple of them, two. You're using both. Good. So what we're going to cover is we're going to cover what we're going to talk about. In all fairness, we're going to, right off the bat, get the #1 topic that I think that some people are thinking in the back of the head about this session. And we'll get that on the table and discussed about right away. Your use cases of why you use these products. The good and bad. The good and bad according to Mike. Don't say the good and bad according to everyone else. If you want to blame someone, blame me. And then making them work together. And then a little bit about nesting we'll talk about. And then we'll wrap it up. So just to be clear, we're going to be talking about two products today. We're going to be talking about VMware Workstation 9, your on-ramp to the cloud, another marketing thing, and Windows 8 client Hyper-V. Notice that this is client Hyper-V. Just like the Server 2012 product, which was Windows 8 Server, if you were part of that at all, where they came out at the Build conference and showed a big screen that Steve Ballmer sat in front of that said Windows 8 Server. That was the original name of Server 2012. They were going to actually call it Windows 8 Server because they wanted to go to a streamlined naming convention. So they came out with Hyper-V. They changed the name to Server 2012. They said, oh, well, we're thinking about throwing the Hyper-V version into the Windows 8. And when we do that, we're just not exactly sure what we're going to call it. Well, then they said, well, why don't we just call it the client Hyper-V? So it's actually not called Hyper-V, it's client Hyper-V. That's the technical term that's used in-house. So the question I have is, I don't know how many people have worked with VMware. I've worked with VMware for going on about 8 or 9 years now. I'm a VCP and a vExpert, all that other kind of good stuff. And I actually voted and judged at VMworld for some of the products. What is the deal with VMware? And what is this? VMware vSphere 5.0. Okay? The exact same logo. What's with this capitalization crap that goes on with these guys? I was researching this, and I'm trying to figure out why they went through these marketing people are phenomenal. They just don't know what the hell. I mean, then they come out with this. That's the official logo for VMware Workstation 9. Then, to top that off, they have a video that they showed at VMworld. VMware vSphere 5. Oh, look, VMware vSphere 5. It's not even the same. I'm sorry. Us Americans, we have to get up, we get upset about things that are just mean nothing. And we have to find something to bitch about. So then they got this V this and V that and V everything and V that, everything is V. Marketing people, I don't get them.
It's not I.
Yeah, at least it's not I. iPod, I that, I this, I that. You think they're following Apple?
I take a crap in the morning.
I take it. Oh, man. Okay, so enough of that. That's my rant, okay? Oh, that was probably the wrong slide to show. So what we have to do is when we talk about these two hypervisors, we have to think different, okay? Steve Jobs, circa 1983, think different. Even Elmo says, wait a minute, you're talking about opposites. I'm getting to that point now, and this is a segue into what you should be thinking in the back of your head about the title of this session, okay? They're total opposites. They're like Luke and Darth Vader. Windows Client 8 Hyper-V and VMware Workstation. Think about it. They're opposites. More likely, they're like Stewie. Family Guy, Star Wars. I don't know if Family Guy is big over here in the UK, but it's huge over in the US. So, Client Hyper-V is a Type 1 hypervisor. It is a bare metal hypervisor. Hardware, CPU, RAM, hard drives, right up to the kernel and the hypervisor directly to the virtual machine. That is Client Hyper-V. What is VMware Workstation? Real quick, don't answer. It is a Type 2 hypervisor. Okay? Anybody know the difference between Type 1 and Type 2? What is Type 2? What's the biggest thing about Type 2, the difference between Type 1 and Type 2? Type 2 requires an underlying operating system. Okay? So when you think about the name of this session, Windows 8 Client Hyper-V versus VMware Workstation, they're total opposites. One requires an operating system. One doesn't. Okay? So if you think about that, you want to talk about technical comparisons, there's going to be comparisons technical-wise through the roof because they don't follow the same architectural philosophy. Type 1 is bare metal. Type 2 requires the OS. What does that mean? It requires the applications to talk just to the kernel. And there's no hypervisor layer. You look back here, you have the kernel and the hypervisor, right? Type 2, you don't have that. There's no layer there. Okay? It's self-contained inside of the application. It's an application running on your desktop. It's like running Word. It's like running Excel. It's the same thing. Now, when you're talking about Hyper-V, Client Hyper-V, it's not. You're actually running the hypervisor. Okay? And I'll get into that, how that actually happens in just a bit. Again, compare the two. Application, inside the Type 2, you have the hypervisor with the VMs in it, but not at the kernel level. Okay? What does that mean? Device drivers? What happens? The operating system has to support the devices, right? The hypervisor does not. The hypervisor goes out to the operating system and says, hey, can you support that? Oh, I can't support that. Well, then I guess I can't unless I para-virtualize it, which means they do some funky stuff in the middle to make it work. Comparing apples and oranges. And I apologize to the people who were in my last session, right next door. I use the same slide, I apologize. But it's apples and oranges. We were talking about the same thing. We were talking about vSphere and Hyper-V. You're really comparing apples and oranges. So let's talk about your use cases, why you'd use these two products. Number one, troubleshooting, right? Then you got development. Application testing. I'm just going to throw a whole bunch out there. Quality assurance, user acceptance, requirements and compliance, OS versions, OS patching, OS upgrades, production. Production? Anybody use these in production? Why? I feel sorry for you if you do. Get rid of that one. Okay. Lame applications. Yeah, lame applications. They're out there. In the last session, we had quite a discussion about Lotus Notes. Lotus Notes is a lame application. Doesn't care what anybody says, that's my opinion, but it's a lame application. When you start talking about other applications that are line of business, okay, or mission critical, that are just terribly written software. And me personally, anybody in here a developer? Oh, well, Tim. Yeah. Today's world, me coming from a architect and design standpoint, developers suck, okay? That's my opinion, because the code is written so badly nowadays, code is just slapped together. They take code and they reuse it and they say, okay, boom, 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 there's your product, take it. Oh, doesn't have it? Well, okay, we'll wait for another revision. Well, we really don't want to add that, it's too much work. Tell them it's on the roadmap. Personally, I don't get along with developers that much, especially ones that, you know, think that they're all high and mighty. Lame users, I got a problem with them too, but everybody does. If you're an administrator, right? You got a user that's, you know, saying, well, my application runs really crappy when I run it on Windows 7 or Windows 8 or whatever, or Windows XP. So you put it inside of a virtual machine and you run it and you try and figure out what the problem is. Or you run it on a full piece of hardware. With these products, obviously you have the advantage of doing it with, you know, inside of a hypervisor. And then you just sometimes just want to fiddle and tinker like Claudio does. Claudio just plays. He gets paid to play. And so that's what he does. He fiddles and tinkers. You also want to use it for demonstrations, i.e. I am now running, oh wait, that's a Mac. I must be running Fusion. Yeah, I'm running VMware Fusion, which is just like VMware Workstation for the Mac. And I'm also running Hyper-V on it, which I'll show you later, so I'm running both. Split admin. Have you ever had an instance where you actually have to administer something and you don't want to have, remember in the old days, I might be showing my age, and I probably am, but there used to be a time when I would have 5 or 6 PCs at my desk as an administrator. And those 5 or 6 PCs, one would be running an IBM 5250 console, one would be running a Unix, a SCO console, one would be running a Windows box, and one would be running a Novell box. And I would have to administer all them. We used to have little KVM switches where you have to switch between the monitors, you know, to switch keyboards, because you only wanted one keyboard. You didn't want keyboards all lined up everywhere, and mice. Now, split admin. You can pretty much create a virtual machine. I have, you know, run it in your client hypervisor and be able to administer that just by accessing the virtual machine. You don't have to have multiple pieces of hardware anymore. And I guess the way everybody's looking at me with a blank stare is like, I'm the only one that's ever done that. Really? Then training, actually using these for training, actually setting up training for these. It's really nice to use these because you can do it at different operating systems. I've got a Mac, well I want to train someone on how to do something in Windows. It's really easy to do. Secure isolation, being able to isolate boxes. For all of these, I don't know if in the UK or in the European Union, which I understand the UK may not be part of soon. I'm not, this is not political, I'm not turning this political, but They have something, we have something called COPA. Is it COPA? Is that right? The Privacy Act? Okay. What that means is that the anti-piracy laws went into effect over in the US. And what they can do is the providers now give you 3 strikes. Actually, it's 6 strikes in written, but they say it's 3 strikes. So if you go out and download pirated software or music or videos or things like that, the provider, your ISP, can send you a letter saying that we know you're doing this and we will downgrade your service. Okay? And you get that up to 6 times, and then they can just cut off your service. You get put on a list, and you can't get internet anymore. This is the wonderful thinking of our US government and why they would do this. So what have they done? They've done secure isolation. The advantage of using a machine that's a virtual machine is you can be totally anonymous with a virtual machine. You can use anonymous proxies, everything. And none of it is traced back to your machine because that is just a VMDK, or it's a VMDK file or a VHD file. You can get rid of it. You can wipe it. You can have it on a USB stick. You can take it wherever you want to go. It's totally anonymous. So, let me go back to this first. Anybody else have any other use cases that they use it for, that are using it today?
Yeah,
anything?
We're using for support, so if a customer calls in with an issue on a certain operating system, we can quickly fire up that OS and see if we can replicate the problem.
Yep, exactly, support. From a troubleshooting perspective, operating system versions, split admin, things like that, definitely. Anything else? No? That's a pretty big list. So, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a Type 1 versus Type 2 on the desktop? Anybody want to chime in? You guys, go ahead if you want to chime in. Anybody want to take a crack at this? Go ahead.
Well, it's like, well, performance, but then I'm wondering about Type 1 versus Type 2 on the desktop. It's not that important, is it, really? From a development perspective, it might be if you're developing device drivers.
You were in my last session. You're like reading my mind here.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this is the point I was going to get to, but he's already gotten to it. It really doesn't matter. You know, the argument is put up there because you can say performance reasons. You can say, you know, from a development standpoint, like you were saying, the different things that go into the product and how you manage the product and how you launch the product, but it really doesn't matter. Okay? It's what you feel comfortable with, what works for you, and what works for the work that you're doing. All right? I'll cover some of the advantages and disadvantages that I found. Ooh, I'm sorry. I hit my mic. I apologize. He's back there going, whoa. Sorry.
There is one use case. I'm not sure how far we are from that, but remember Brian's article on, I think it was when Microsoft, you know, the rumors started about Azure, like having Windows desktops, you know, hosted by Microsoft. But one thing I told him like years ago that as a user, for me, it would be really cool is, and you can't do that, of course, like with a physical.
Right.
With a Type 2, potentially. But one use case that I see is if I'm at home and everything that I run is completely independent from hardware, I'm running at home, doing whatever I do at home. Performance, I think it will get solved down the road,
right,
in terms of getting as close as possible to physical. But then I leave home and I'm going for dinner and I want to render my video in a much faster way.
You do that at dinner?
Well,
often?
Not at dinner, but you know,
okay.
When I leave, I want to leave it rendering, for example.
Okay.
So it would be really cool if then I can offload my VM running on Type 1, for example. I offload to the cloud, like to, let's say, Microsoft. Because then they can say, okay, your VM now, I'm going to assign 200 CPUs and 2 terabytes of RAM.
Exactly.
What I would never be able to do at home.
Yep. And I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. I don't know. I don't think we're there yet, though.
Yeah.
Because
again, it may get to that point because then something that takes an hour at home may take a minute.
Right.
If I can throw as many resources as I want to that.
Yep. But
it becomes really flexible.
It becomes flexible, but it's also dependent on a single point of failure. connectivity to the cloud.
Yeah,
So the connectivity to the cloud is always a single point of failure.
but you know, just looking back at our probably home environment, how many times you actually lost
No, and
connection
I'm
to
just
your
saying,
ISP
yeah, I'm just
for a
saying,
long period of
if,
time?
if
let's see,
you're in the middle of renting a video and then you lose
3
connection,
years.
yeah.
Well,
His, Rick's ISP
no.
sucks,
But
so he drops
lives
all the
like
time.
in the jungle,
He
so
lives
it's
in
a
the
different
wilderness,
story.
yes, he does.
I mean, people that are civilized that living in large centers,
Yeah,
you know.
well, Google Fiber, look at that, I mean,
all
you
you
know,
lose.
yeah.
I hate y'all. Oh, you know you should move to.
So that, Claudio brings up a valid point, you know, but in contrast to that, let me go back here real quick. Oh, this is gonna take a little while to get rid of all this and go back. Then my question is, what is this? Your on-ramp to the cloud. Type 2. You're on, how's Type 2 going to get you a hardware agnostic device in the cloud? I don't know. We'll have to see. Huh?
Be interested to hear your wag on what that might look like, living in that world a little bit.
On,
Where would you expect them to be going with that statement?
I think well, from what I know, Horizon is going to get much bigger than it is today. Okay, so I don't know if everybody's familiar with product Horizon that comes from VMware. That will eventually encompass the client side of their product line also.
But isn't that Infuse, basically?
It is, okay, but it's all cloud-based. Okay, so it's going to manage everything in their clouds. So individual users will actually be given an interface into their cloud. It'll be like an Azure interface where you'll be able to upload. And this is just me speculating, okay? If anybody's in the room that works for VMware, it's just me speculating. But I believe that when you buy a license to Workstation in the future, you're going to be getting an interface to the cloud where your virtual machine will be local and you'll be able to move it from the cloud back and forward.
I guess that would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like tying into the vCenter APIs and stuff.
Yep. Correct. But that's my opinion. Anybody else have an opinion on that? Anybody work for VMware? Good. Anybody work for Microsoft in here? Well, you won't admit it anyways if you did. Oh, there you go. He admits it. All right. Okay. So we talked, and you haven't spoken up at all. You have no opinion on this. Okay. Oh. Uh-oh. That's when guys like the presenters like us go, oh, okay, here we go. All right.
But one of the cool things about this conference, though, is that you can share those opinions as an individual and not have to be represented.
Right. Now, if you were at Tech Ed or you were at VMworld, forget it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, try and do that next week at Synergy.
As Richard just said, you can share any opinion, so I'll blame him if anybody's listening. No, I'm only joking. But isn't there some kind of common ground? Because we've just spoken about hypervisors and so on and different resources, don't you think that we're kind of now entering this whole kind of area of grid in terms of NUMA technology and sharing resources and stuff like that? Because I was in your previous presentation and I actually asked a question to the group about who is actually using the NUMA technology.
And nobody.
And nobody was. And the way that it's just I'm looking at this is that sharing of memory between different devices is kind of an interesting kind of toe in the water from these vendors to say, well, actually now we're looking at something different to a single hypervisor entity. Even a VMware cluster is not really a cluster, is it? It's not really a cluster. But a real cluster to me is something that can be absolutely looked upon as commodity hardware sharing resources, memory, processor, storage, whatever. And the NUMA technology is a kind of move towards that utopia. So for me, there's lots of connotations around grid technology.
I don't, in contrast to that, I don't know if the ecosystem completely embraces NUMA.
It doesn't.
Yeah. So I think that's where we run into one of the roadblocks there.
Well, some of them don't because it killed their models, right?
Right,
Dell's,
exactly,
HPs,
exactly.
and those guys, they're already shitting themselves because
Right. When you talk about SQL, you know, that embraces NUMA. Why? Because Microsoft embraces NUMA inside of Hyper-V and that virtualization of SQL, right? But when you talk about Oracle, Oracle doesn't embrace NUMA.
Well, Microsoft are the biggest issue here.
Yeah,
I used to work
well,
for Citrix. I know Rick quite well, although he probably doesn't remember me. But I talked to the advanced product group in Citrix about this about 12, 15 years ago, and they said to me, "Yeah, forget it." And I said, "Why is that?" I said, "Well, because MetaFrame was around at that point, and my point was the same. Yeah, MetaFrame, it's not a farm. It's not a farm. It's nothing like a farm." And they said, "No, we know. It's kind of a marketing thing." And I said, "Well, when are we going to get to the point of having one big server entity sharing lots of different
right.
hardware nodes and that sort of stuff?" And I said, "Yeah, we can do it." In fact, Citrix were doing some development work with the universities all over the world doing this stuff. They didn't tell anybody they were doing it. And I said, "Well, why can't we have that then?" And they said, "Because Microsoft would go apeshit." And so there lies the issue. You know, licensing, revenue, money, whatever, is again stifling the advances of technology. And it's
it's a
such a
common
shame.
theme, though, right?
It is.
If you look at the
It's frustrating.
mobile device industry, same thing in the mobile device industry, right? The business models of the vendors that are playing there are threatened by some of the changes and the advancements. So they stifle things like the Microsoft with the VDI licensing models right now, like the, at least in the States, I assume also over here, the Verizons and the AT&Ts, the mobile carriers, you know, putting their locks, their software on top of operating systems and trying to control what goes so it can support their business model.
Tim had something to add?
I've moved in the last year to, I've used VMware Workstation for quite a bit. I really love the idea of my hypervisors and just sort of gave up on them when I saw Windows 8 coming out.
Yeah.
What I've actually gone to is using the server OS on the laptop.
Sure.
And I've gotten very used to now taking these VM loads and just offloading them,
Yep.
Running them on the server infrastructure that I have at home, and then when I'm going on the road, I just pull the VMs that I need over the laptop, bring them with me.
Dude,
And,
Yeah.
You're
you
thinking.
got limited
I like
capacity
it.
here this big, so I can't bring everything with me all the time, but I can just bring what I need to. And I'm getting really used to that now. I like it.
Right, and just wait until you can actually just run it from the cloud. I mean, look, Azure right now, I can upload a VHD to Azure, but it takes freaking forever, okay? But once it gets there, I can just load it in a VM and it runs in Azure, you know, not a problem. A 30 gig machine took me 2.5 days to upload, you know, but that's the biggest bottleneck. You gotta figure out how to fix that shit and then you'd be able to do it. But to your point, I appreciate the conversation. I think it's a good conversation to have, but I got to get, I don't want to get in too deep into NUMA and stuff like that because that would go forever. So let's talk about VMware Workstation and the advantages and disadvantages, at least according to Mike. According to everyone else, they might be something totally different, but these are my opinions. In VMware Workstation, there's a lot to read here. I'm just going to skim through it. It's been around for a long time. It's been around a lot longer than Hyper-V. 3D hardware acceleration, Unity mode, which is killer. Especially Fusion Unity mode on a Mac is awesome. Built-in networking, runs on older hardware, which Hyper-V does not. Link clones, Hyper-V does not. Drag and drop clipboard, Hyper-V does with RDP 8.0. GUI for tabs and VMs. Auto resize, big list of guest OS support, and I'm talking In my last session, I brought up the list in my last session. I don't have the slide in this deck, but you were in that session. That list is huge. VMware Workstation supports like NetWare, all kinds of Linux, Mac OS X server, something called Ecom Station, Solaris, you name it. It even supports OS2 Warp. Okay, and DOS. Okay, but Hyper-V, that list is down to 4 or 5 Windows operating systems, 3 Linux operating systems, and nothing else.
So you're saying there's a clear winner for split admin in the government space?
Boom. That's why I work with this guy. Okay. Guest isolation, USB native, 3.0 native, which is cool. Shared VMs, still haven't gotten that concept. To me, it's a little flaky. It's really unsecure if you think about it. And encrypted VMs, which makes it secure. Disadvantages, cost. $249 American, maybe 200 and some pounds. I don't know exactly. VM disk performance is totally inferior. Totally. VirtualBox even beats VMware Workstation on a local piece of hardware. Okay, the disk performance sucks. Portability of images, reliant on a host OS, obviously. Display response compared to RDP8 there is no, in my opinion, comparison. RDP8 blows it out of the water. Tab display gets messed up. You're switching machines, and I think, Rick, you experienced this, oh no, it wasn't you, but in one of the presentations I saw, you're switching tabs, and the tabs get all messed up on the top, and it's just it's a display thing. And I'm a PowerShell freak, and I can't believe you can't do PowerShell in VMware Workstation. You can do it in vSphere, you can do it in SRM, you can do it in this product, that product, the other product, but you can't do it in Workstation. That blows. It really does. And shared VMs. I have it on both lists because I personally don't like shared VMs because I think it's, number one, a security problem, the way that VMware has it set up with the whole web, accessing it via web, and how, to me, it just opens up too many possibilities for problems. Client Hyper-V, it's free. Well, asterisk. In America, we say free as in free beer. And the reason for that is because, guess what? You still got to have support or server or something that you pay for. Unless you don't rely on the forums, like, then it's free. Disk performance is very good. Because why? Come on, all at once. It's a type 1 hypervisor. Okay. Live migration for storage, awesome in 3.0. Dynamic memory. Ultra portability of images, and what I mean by ultra is VMware Workstation right now, you can't take a VHD and like move it to VirtualBox. I'm sorry, a VMDK and move it to VirtualBox. You can take a VHD or a VHDX and move it to VirtualBox natively. VirtualBox will suck it right in. Okay? VHD and VHDX, they're like universal. VMware never caught on to the whole thing like, let's play nice with everybody else in the sandbox. They said that, we're kind of jerks and we're just going to play in our own little world and you have to do work with us. And, we're not going to manage multiple hypervisors. We're not going to make our disk, compatible with anybody else. We're inside of our own little world. That was the wrong way to do it, and they're paying the price for it. RDP 8.0, bare metal type 1, of course. The same BMM for client and server, so if you use it on the server side, it's the same virtual machine manager that's in the client. It's basically the same thing. There are a couple things that are removed from the client side, which I'll talk about. 2, 3, 4 things, I think, in total. But otherwise, it's the same. It has smart resize, again, RDP. Easier GUI, I believe it's an easier GUI because why? Because you're used to the MMC. It's got the same kind of look and feel. It knows Windows, of course it does. Guest isolation and virtual fiber. Virtual fiber you can do in either one, so that shouldn't be there. Disadvantages to me, it's .0. It is .0. It's 3.0. Okay. I have a thing against .0 products, and anybody who I had somebody in the last session when I talked about putting something. It wasn't after the last session. I had a question about putting that in production, and I said I rarely ever put a .0 product in production. No 3D hardware acceleration, requires remote FX. SLAT capable or emulated CPU, you can emulate SLAT. VMware Workstation emulates SLAT, so you can run Hyper-V 8 under VMware Workstation. Drag and drop only via RDP. It's a one-way text via the console. For some reason, Microsoft, I think, missed the boat on this whole clipboard thing with the consoles. You got to run RDP in order to get any of that functionality. The whole console thing, you can only do one way, and you can only do text. Okay. USB redirect, RDP, cloning templates and link clones. They don't believe in the link clone philosophy. They have the differencing parent-child disks, which I get, but I don't understand why they don't make it easier.
How do you differentiate between the two?
I'm sorry?
I said, how do you differentiate between the two, if you don't mind an ignorance question?
Differentiate between what?
Link clones and...
Well, they have the parent and child. You can only do one. You can only have one child to a parent. Link clones, you can have multiple, and you can roll them back up. Okay?
So
Capturing the deltas. Yeah, yeah. They're much more difficult to manage, I believe. No snapshot GUI, pretty pictures. Somebody complained about that on the forums, saying, hey, I don't have these little triangles and round dots that do the snapshot manager. And snapshot manager and Hyper-V manager is just text. Not a big deal. Virtual switch options are limited. It's extensible, but it doesn't have the same amount of options inside the virtual switch that Workstation does. There are no tabs. I even posted on a forum that I think that the VMM needs a workover, or needs a makeover, if you want to call it that. You need tabs. You need the web, HTML5 type of interface instead of this blocky MMC type thing. Limited VMM console, you may need SCVMM. SCVMM kind of expands on everything and connects the whole operations manager suite together. It allows you to do some things that you can't do in VMM. Limited OS guess, which I've already talked about, and there's no encryption on the disk. You can't encrypt. To my knowledge, you can't encrypt the virtual hard disk. Why? I mean, why would they not do that? Why would they not make that an option? I mean, in today's world of security, but you can't do it. VMware Workstation, you basically go to the disk, you say encrypt, and it's done. But you can't do that in client Hyper-V or even server Hyper-V. But you're going to put BitLocker on a server? Yeah. So that's, that doesn't make sense to me. Okay. Okay, so did you know that client Hyper-V has a couple things server doesn't? It has sleep support, it has wireless adapter support. Okay, so you can do that inside of client Hyper-V. Obviously on a server you're not going to need sleep. Servers shouldn't be sleeping. And servers shouldn't have wireless, right? You can do a fix. Somebody posted a fix out there on TechNet where you can actually make the wireless work from the server side. But you have to do bridging. You have to create a network bridge and do that. Client Hyper-V requires SLAT capable or emulated processors. Server 2012 Hyper-V does not. So, hang on. So, you go out and you buy a brand new laptop, an i3, an i5, or an i7, or one of the new AMDs, right? Those will be SLAT compatible. One of the points that I made on the VMware Workstation side is it works with older hardware. I can take my old Dell Vostro 1600 Pentium and run VMware Workstation on it. Okay? It won't do 64-bit OSs inside of it. It'll do 32-bit, but it'll still run, and it'll still virtualize those 32-bit OSs. Okay? Now, why do you think this is? And no telling. Anybody? Anybody have any idea why they made this a requirement? graphics. Right comb graphics has something to do with right comb and all this other stuff that we're doing with 3D, OpenGL, blah, 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 this, that, and the other thing, technical terms up the wazoo, and maybe you have a simpler explanation for it, but it has to do with graphics.
Yeah, it's not really a simple explanation, but the reason for it is that the display drivers for your NVIDIA, AMD video card cause TLB flushes,
Mhm.
which just hammers the performance for the VMs. So that's why.
Yeah, that's it. It's
But pretty much any AMD CPU that's been manufactured in like last
Right.
so long
But
will support it. But
it-
yeah, it's all the Nehalem and Westmere Intel chips.
yeah, and it should be noted that the reason for that is because it's a Type 1 hypervisor. It talks directly to the hardware. A Type 2 hypervisor like VMware Workstation can do all that because it relies on the OS to do that rendering and do that work for it. Okay? That's kind of cool, huh? All right, so let's put all the pieces of the puzzle together and let's get the Hyper-V and move on. So enable the client Hyper-V, you have to have professional or enterprise version of Windows 8, and you have to have 4 gigs of RAM minimum. Okay, I can tell you right now that I can run, according to the specs, you can run 4 or 5 virtual machines on the 4 gig, I think, and then it says you can go more than that. I installed, I had 1, 2, 3, 4. I had 5 virtual machines and a 8 gig MacBook Pro running Hyper-V under VMware Fusion, and it was negligible performance. I mean, I could move between screens, mouse was a little laggy and stuff like that. It's running an SSD drive, but it was fluid. It was very fluid. Workable. Not optimal. I could really use 16 gig. I'm telling my boss this, but you know, I use what they give me. So, check your CPU for SLAT. You can use the Core Info, which Mark Rosanovich had created, part of the sysinternals, and now sysinternals with Microsoft. What you're looking for is you're looking for the asterisk sign. Okay, that's good. A negative sign, that's bad. That means you can't run it. All right, and to give you an example, well, for AMD, you can look at an article. AMD actually, because AMD, I don't know what the hell their deal is, but they list processors, but they don't follow any kind of convention. Intel, i3, i5, i7, i whatever. AMD, it's like a list this long of different processors and whether or not they support SLAT. It's crazy. So to give you an idea, this is what Core Info is going to tell you. What you're looking for is you're looking for the supports Intel Extended Page Tables SLAT. All right? When you run Core Info. This is on an i7. This is, now, the reason why this shows negative right now is because the hypervisor is present. That means I ran this on my Windows 8 machine that already had Hyper-V role enabled. So Core Info will give you wrong information if you already have a hypervisor enabled. You have to run it before you enable the role. Obviously you would, or otherwise you wouldn't be able to enable the role. This one right here, okay, this is from a Core i7. This is good because it has the 2 asterisks. It says, yes, good to go. All right? This one from an AMD, this is bad because it has negative. It does not support nested page tables or SLAT. Client Hyper-V will not run on that box. Okay? VMware Workstation will run on any of them. All right, so we went through the enable the client Hyper-V. Now, some BIOSes, especially for some reason Lenovo out there has a huge forum about how they report CPU capabilities inside of their BIOS. I don't know if it's a Phoenix AMI BIOS thing or whatever, or how they do it, but they say to disable DEP, and it'll fix some of your CPU reporting to the BIOS. And some say to disable TPM, you know, and that'll fix some of the reporting. I don't know what the deal is. You can go out, if you have a Lenovo or you have one that reports incorrectly, there's funky things you can do inside of a BIOS to fix that. Make sure the VTX or virtualization mode is enabled in the BIOS. Obviously, you can't run it without. Even if the role installs, try and start a VM. There will be times when the role will actually install without a problem. But guess what? When you try and start a VM, it won't start. And it'll come back and it'll say, oh, sorry, can't start, can't start, can't start. And so many people get pissed off and frustrated. They're just like, how come this isn't working? Well, because actually it installed the role, but it didn't pass the SLAT test. You can actually have success installing the role via DISM. Okay, everybody know what DISM is? That's the disk imaging tool from Microsoft. You can install it directly instead of going through the GUI, the server manager, and clicking on the role and installing it. Some people, and it comes back and it won't start a VM. Some people have had luck in doing it this way, and it actually starts the VMs. And this I'm getting directly from the TechNet forums. These are what people are talking about. This is what conversations that I've had with people in the forums, and this is problems that people have posted right there. So this isn't just my opinion. This isn't, just me talking and complaining. So what happened when you did that? What happens when you check that role? Anybody know? And obviously you can't answer. No? Okay. Your Windows 8 OS just became a virtual machine running on the client HyperV hypervisor. Okay? So what happens is the machine actually flips. Boom. It makes your Windows 8 a virtual machine, or puts it on top of the hypervisor layer. Okay? Instead of communicating directly with the hardware. It's a special VM. Microsoft's architecture notes, which I have asked for. I've asked for through several channels on the client Hyper-V, which no one seems to admit that they exist. But it is quote unquote from a Hyper-V MVP that says it is a special VM that you can't get the VHDX. You can't just access it, okay? It's sitting out there in space or something, I don't know. But it's something that you just can't access and pull out. So if you wanted to take your machine, if it's a virtualized, and you figure, well, it's a VHDX, right? The hypervisor is just launching a VHDX, launching the virtual machine. I should be able to take that and be able to take my Windows 8 machine and put it anywhere. You can't, though. For whatever reason. I haven't gotten an answer. I don't know if you'll answer, but you can't. It might be top secret, I'd have to kill you if I told you type information. But what you do is, I found interesting, is you check out something called the DISM log. When you actually enable that role, I did a file mon, and I was looking at some of the files that are actually changed when you do that, and then you go through the reboot cycle. The DISM log shows some really interesting stuff that's going on, specifically around how that machine is actually being created, the actual work that DISM actually creates that virtual machine by checking that, enabling that role. So if you get an opportunity, check that out. Anybody seen this yet? Anybody running Windows 8? Yeah, also Windows 8. That shows up on Windows 8 too. Either way, same kernel. Anybody seen this? This is their new blue screen. New friendly blue screen from Microsoft. I have seen this several times since I enabled the Hyper-V on my Windows 8 preview machine. When I moved to Windows 8 release, a lot of these blue screens went away. But I saw this several times when I was working with that. But it's, that has to do with, and if you notice, one of them was HAL, but you'll notice I was running it. I was running it under VMware Workstation, so yeah, that could cause a problem, especially since VMware at the time didn't support Windows 8 officially. So especially, they do not today. You can go into vSphere 5.1 U1, update 1, or you can go into VMware Workstation 9, and you can select Hyper-V as an operating system. But when you do it, you're selecting it with the paran, unsupported paran. Okay, so you can actually select it as an operating system. A little bit about licensing. I am not going to dwell on this. I've dealt a lot with Microsoft licensing. I've lost probably a lot of my brain cells and my brain from dealing with Microsoft licensing. It's only the really sick people in the world would get involved in that, and I was one of them for whatever reason. But Workstation, you buy it, you own it. 1-to-1. Okay? With Hyper-V, the role is free. With Pro or Enterprise. Well, you got to have Pro or Enterprise, so you had to pay for the OS, right? Either subscription model based or the full retail, right? OEM, retail version, whatever. So you can enable it, it's free, okay? Let's talk about BOS rights. Anybody know what BOS means? Operating System Environment, right? These are called BOS rights. BOS rights are basically what Microsoft was hanging on for years when VMware or ESX started to virtualize Windows. Their marketing people every, I don't know, couple weeks came out with a new licensing terminology and costs and everything else, and it's been revised like 1,000 times since then. Well, now they've come up with this BOS. Windows 8 Enterprise allows for 4 BOSes installed on a PC. Wanting Enterprise, doesn't matter what the hypervisor is. So when you buy a Windows 8 license, even if you're running VMware Workstation, you are allowed to run 4 versions of Windows 8 Enterprise on that hypervisor. No matter what the hypervisor. Client Hyper-V, VMware Workstation, whatever. If you have Enterprise, you have that right. If you have Pro, you have 0. Nada, zip, nothing. There's no limit to the amount of VMs you can create, just a limit on how many times you can install the Windows 8 Enterprise in the virtual machines that are running on a licensed physical PC. I dumbed that down from the 10 paragraphs that it actually was, okay? So if you understand that, you can create a whole crap load of machines. It's just how many you can have running at one time.
That limit, is it a legal limit or it's an enforced limit?
It's not an enforced limit, it's a legal
Just
limit.
legal.
Yep. Correct.
Yeah, I guess the idea here is if you've got some installation media, you can use that for 4 VMs.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're going to pay for it.
Right. And to me, that makes sense. It doesn't make sense that Windows 8 Pro, you were not allowed to do any. Because you should allow at least 1. And they don't. It's 0.
They
Yeah.
allow one.
What's that?
They allow one. The one that just became.
Yeah, exactly. The special VM that your Windows 8 box, that's the one. Yes. Exactly. Windows 8 Pro allows for none. That's what I was saying. So what happens? Microsoft licensing, you get lost, confused, it goes all over the place, you don't know what the hell's going on, and then all of a sudden you start building all the machines and you got all these Windows boxes laying out there, and then somebody gets pissed off, or your vendor decides that they want to do a software audit, and then these guys suddenly show up at your front door, okay? And I have been at a business about 8 years ago where these guys did show up at the front door, and they showed up with their briefcases and everything else, and they wanted to see all the licenses and everything. They actually did. I don't know if they do that anymore. I don't think they have the people to do that, but they actually did. And what happens here in the UK is when that happens and they find you not in compliance, you got to deal with a guy like this, right? You got to go in front of a barrister, because they're going to say, you owe us a bunch of money. But again, I am not going to get in this. We're just going to stay calm, and we're going to move along, because I'm not going to get too deep into licensing. All right? But of course, Veruca from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory says, I want both, and I want them now. I had to look up her name. I forgot her name. It was Veruca something. I don't remember. Veruca Klump or Crump or... Yeah. So you want to run both of them. Well, it's very possible to do. You can have both worlds in Windows 8. Attempting to install VMware Workstation on Windows 8 with the Hyper-V role enabled will get you this. Okay? VMware Workstation says, you're already running hypervisor. You can't install me. No way, Jose. Because we know you're running Hyper-V. Well, guess what? There's really an easy way around that. First thing is install VMware Workstation first before you enable the Hyper-V role. the VMware Workstation doesn't know Hyper-V is running when it does the install. Right? Right? What's the problem with that? And I think I have something on this later, I apologize. What's the problem with that? What is one of the biggest pet peeves I have about VMware Workstation and just software in general that works like crap is you install an upgrade and it requires a complete uninstall and a complete reinstall of the product. And when you do that, it's going to say, oh, babe, you've got Hyper-V installed. I can't give you the new version because you can't have Hyper-V on this box. So basically, you have to do that for every time that you want to upgrade VMware Workstation. The other option is to turn Hyper-V on and off in the boot manager, and you can use BCD Edit to do that. You can use a BC Edit for the boot option. That'll change the actual boot parameters of the machine, okay? Or you can do it via command line. Now this option will actually, what will that do? What happens when you do a BC Edit and you change the boot parameters? You get a multi-boot menu when you start up, right? So this is going to give you another option when you boot up. It's going to say Windows 8 or it's going to say no Hyper-V. So you can select which one you want to run. This one you can do it via the command line. It just does a, it sets the hypervisor launch type and it does a restart. The hypervisor, the role, the client Hyper-V role, and I think this is really cool, is it can be turned on and off, flipped on and off like a light switch. I don't know how they do it. They just, it's on, oh, it's off. No, it's on, no, it's off.
Does that apply to servers as well?
Pardon me?
Does that apply to servers?
Yes. Yes, it does. I'm sorry, I can't hear you that well.
Would that tend to suggest that this management partition or special VM isn't then encapsulated in a VHDX?
See, and I can't get any information on that.
You have to take it in and take it out, and you wouldn't be able to just flip it on and flip it off then.
I can't get any information on that. He's not that one we'll have to leave up until they actually release that information or make it available. Because from what I can tell, it's just DISM, changing the machine from a virtual to a physical, from back physical to a virtual. There's a bunch of other crap that goes on, but I don't know what it is. Because there's so much stuff that goes on when you're doing a file mon, there's other things that are going on at the time this is happening. So. What's that?
It's just configured by the bootloader. So as far as I know, there's no VHD for the root partition.
See, then that's what.
As far as I know, it's bare metal.
Okay.
I have done a Windows 8 installation to VHD and then turn the roll on, and I have been able to take the end VHD and just run that.
Sure. If you did that first, yep, you can do that, yes.
Enabling that run doesn't affect performance, or doesn't appear to affect the performance of the native Windows 8 machine as well. So obviously it's doing something at a...
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It has direct access. It's a special case partition. It has direct access to all the hardware.
Yeah, that's the advantage. That's one of the huge advantages. Being able to talk directly to the hardware. I mean, you're down at machine level code here. VMware Workstation is just talking to APIs. That's all it's doing. But these guys are at machine level code, so they're talking, that's why you get better disk performance. That's why you get better networking performance. Things like that. You got a direct pipeline right out to it. This is basically, I'm just showing what your boot edit options would be in multi-boot. If you ever want to add anything to your boot, if you ever want to make it a dual boot into Windows 7 or something like that, you just do the BC edit and you can add an operating system. It's really easy to do. I remember, if you remember in the old days, it was really hard to do. You had to have a boot manager and you had to, a third-party boot manager, and you had to put your, it's like working with Boot Camp on a Mac. It's a pain in the ass. Yeah. So in both worlds, I'm sorry, to continue on, the option number 3 to do that is to use DISM to enable the role. So you can do DISM right from the command line to enable and disable the role also. Okay, so either BCD edit, option 1, option 2, command line, or boot manager, or DISM, or the GUI. So you actually really have 4. And there's another one, PowerShell. Of course, it's Windows. You can do pretty much anything in PowerShell. Okay. And I prefer to do this. So but that's just me. The problem is that when you run it, you can't run any 64-bit VMs. You only run 32-bit. So when you run Hyper-V inside of VMware Workstation, and VMware Workstation, you can only run 32-bit machines. You can't run 64-bit. It won't allow won't allow to talk to the 64-bit.
What do you use it for then?
I'm sorry?
I guess you use it for some of the old ancient operating systems. But
Yeah. But this is only the scenario where you would run both. You know, not necessarily just running one, you would run both. So if I was running VMware Workstation on a Windows 8 Hyper-V box. So like me, I run both because I want the ability to I want to be able to run, and don't ask me why. I have an old game emulator. Does anybody use the old Atari or Nintendo 64 game emulators? Well, it runs on DOS. Okay, so I have a DOS VM, but I can only run that on VMware Workstation, right? So I run that on my Windows 8, which is already Hyper-V role enabled, because I want to run very fast Windows machines on the Hyper-V side, but I still have a place where I need to run these little one-offs, you know, and I need VMware Workstation to do that. So I know it sounds really geeky, and Claudio and I are in the same boat. So the old Space Invaders, you know, the emulator. What's that? No. No. So updates to VMware Workstation, like I was saying, when you do the update, you're going to get this again. Disable the Hyper-V role, rinse, repeat, get a new update, rinse, repeat, blah, blah, blah. That's how you would upgrade it. Until VMware finally realizes, hey, maybe we ought to make a switch in here that we actually turn it off. Both worlds in VMware Workstation, you can from the release notes of Workstation 9. Okay? Nested virtualization of ESXi is enabled, allowing virtual extensions, right? Hyper-V is included as an OS selection, but Hyper-V has been added. This is their verbiage. Enables the customers to run Windows 8 with Hyper-V enabled or install Hyper-V server. This feature is not supported and probably never will be. They're very adamant about probably never will be. Microsoft does not support nesting of their hypervisor, which makes it, think of a guy who's writing this, okay? Oh, it's extremely difficult. I'm going to make this so anti-Microsoft statement, you know, if not impossible for VMware to fix issues that may occur in this configuration. For this reason, this capability has been implemented purely to see if we could do it. I appreciate the humor, but at the same time, you look at it and it's still the same bitching back and forth. It's still a, you know, I get you, I jab you here, and I jab you there, and it just, you know, it gets ridiculous. Yeah, you know. Ricky stole stole my shovel out of my sandbox. Oh no. And then they put even a caution in big red letters. Do not attempt to run Hyper-V on a virtual machine in production. Well, no shit. I mean, really? Is that a disclaimer? Be like, you can't buy, you know, don't tip over hot coffee from McDonald's or else you could sue McDonald's. You know, you got to put, oh, caution, hot. Well, no shit, it's coffee, you know? All right, let's talk about nesting. These are actually called nesting dolls. Notice the Star Wars theme I got going on here with, oh, yeah, okay. Nesting is, Microsoft doesn't support it. Okay, that's, VMware made that very obvious in their statement. VMware supports it, obviously, because they support nesting their ESXi. But they support it saying, oh, if you want to try out ESXi, that's why we support it. Well, yeah, okay, not really. They support it because they want to do something different than Microsoft does. And nesting is not necessarily a good thing. These are actually nesting dolls. If you know, you put one inside of the other and inside of the other and inside of the other. Well, what's the point of virtualizing a hypervisor? Just to mess around, right? I mean, play around, you know, to be Claudio, to fiddle and tinker, and get paid for it, you know, and do stuff like that. I mean, that's why would you virtualize a hypervisor? Why would you do that necessarily especially in a production environment?
Production, no, I could see it from a learning scenario.
Absolutely.
It's a learning system
Yeah.
center. learning
Fiddle and
environment.
tinker and learn and, yeah. But at the same time, there are people out there who truly believe, and I've spoken to one of them here at the conference who thought, oh, we should be able to do that in production.
Do they work for the government?
Do they work for the government? Yeah. No, and I just looked at them like, are you serious? And they said, well, we thought about it. I said, no, don't even think about it. Why would you kill yourself? You're working your way out of a job.
What was their reason?
Cost. Consolidation costs. They don't want to spend any more money on hardware. I know, it's really a lame reason. Especially hardware is so cheap these days. It's really a lame reason. But it was like a 2-minute conversation, and I was just like, I couldn't believe this person was telling me that. Anyways, nesting isn't necessarily a good thing. I don't completely agree with Microsoft that it's a totally bad thing that you shouldn't do. And I've never heard them really come up with a statement saying it's absolutely a bad thing to do. But according to their competitors, they have. I think it's a good thing to do from a troubleshooting, from a tinker kind of a thing, to do what you want to do. And from our desktops, our administration desktops, to be able to do stuff like that is kind of cool. Try out new stuff, learn more knowledge. The bad thing about nesting, just a few more points, is you can't use wireless adapters in nesting. They haven't figured that all out, how to get that WLAN driver to go across in nesting. You also, keyboard functions are a freaking nightmare. Trying to do a function F2, whatever, this, that, the other thing is just crazy talk. Yeah, especially doing it with Fusion. And then display issues. You're always going to have display issues when you nest because you're talking about graphics. That's just the way life is. It's interesting that you note that when we noted about the direct communication to the graphics adapters, these in your session yesterday, Rick's session, he was talking about the GPUs that I think NVIDIA was showing one. That's like a $4,000 GPU or something, a big monster server GPU. Yeah. Now, how is that going to work with the Type 1 hypervisor? I mean, realistically, Microsoft is saying that you wouldn't use that in a client type situation. So they're segregating the client from the server. So someone who's telling me that, well, we want to run Server 2012 on my laptop so I have that capability, or I want to run this client Hyper-V on a server class hardware.
So I've been dying to ask the question, actually, all the way through. So we had talked about the basic display driver. How does that play into the mix? I think that might kind of partially answer his question, right?
Sorry, so
Talking
does it
about
work in relation to Hyper-V, or what do you?
Well, I mean, realistically, if you wanted to take Server 2012,
Yeah.
okay, and you wanted to run that on a laptop, so instead of running Windows 8, because with Server 2012, what do you get? You get 4 features of Remote FX, the GPU, and all that kind of stuff, which you don't get with the client side. But what if you ran client side on a server class hardware with that type of GPU? You totally disabled that communication to that graphics GPU.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so the virtual device is just not included, so it's not there, even if you're running on server class hardware. It has been a feature request
Oh.
to do the hardware virtualization for graphics,
Okay.
but we haven't implemented it yet.
Okay. That's a viable answer. That's reasonable. Okay. From this standpoint, I am done. I can do a demo. I think I have 5 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? First off, I want to get questions in. Yes?
So, if you want to compare apples to apples, not that I played with it, so what are your thoughts about Zen Client? That's
The- oh.
supposed to be a Type 1.
Yeah, it is a Type 1, but it's to me, it's a very limited Type 1 in terms of it does more from the aspect of, I mean, they get involved in all kinds of of modularizing the virtual machine and putting security, you know, and all that other kind of stuff. Besides the fact that it's based on Zen, I'm not a big Zen fan, okay? And I have a problem with DOM 0, and I have a problem with the way that's all architected. But that's my standpoint on it. I just think it was made more for a specific thing of taking a virtual machine and putting it, from a corporate use standpoint, taking a virtual machine and putting it into a person's laptop or desktop, or more likely a laptop, and being able to run a corporate image. It's really not for someone to take and be able to create multiple virtual machines, you know, to be able to test with and play with and do things like that. I mean, you could do it.
It's like a high value, very specific.
I believe it is. I think it's very market specific, and I think it's very use case specific.
The
because
XT version makes sense.
the
in
XT
that
does,
specific
yes.
use case,
Yes,
But outside of that,
right.
I just got it.
I think the whole security thing kind of bends that a little bit because they're really high on the whole, you know, they want to make it an isolated, you'll be able to wipe it remotely, you know, and do all this other kind of like RingCube, you know, with the RingCube thing and be able to do all that just by connecting to the internet and be able to, you can't, VMware Workstation and a client Hyper-V weren't really designed for that. They weren't designed under the same, you know, architectural premise as that. So I think that's where they're separated a little bit.
With the isolation,
Yeah.
portability,
Yeah.
and the management policy and stuff. Right?
Right, right. It's more like taking an iPad and having one of the cloud services do a remote wipe on it, you know, having, I don't remember what some of those cloud services are. You can install on an iPad and it'll do remote wipes and it'll do wipe your email, it'll change your, you know, whatever. That's the same type of thing in my opinion with the Zen client, is that it's basically, I think it's going to turn into more of a service type of thing, where they give you a VM, they can control it from the cloud, they can manage it from the cloud, but it's not something where you put multiple VMs on a single machine.
Yeah. Well, I guess the goal as well is at one point to be able to check in and check out
Yeah.
something from your VDI environment
Correct.
to your local.
Right.
But I think that's where the main benefit will be, you know.
Yeah.
You take your laptop, you go out with your VDI
Right.
on your laptop. You go back, everything syncs,
Right.
and now
And
the VDI is there.
And to that point, I don't think that that's where VMware and even Microsoft want to go. I think that they're going more towards the consumer, you know, the people who want to test this stuff and you know, want to have multiple machines running on a single piece of hardware.
So VMware is going down that road for a bit, you know, run it when you're in the data center, you're on the network, run it on the
Yeah.
server infrastructure, and
Yeah,
then check it out.
Yep. They got rid of it.
You
They
know,
killed it.
Makes sense.
But a VMware dude actually talked to me last night. It was kind of bizarre, actually. We had that conversation. That evidently, the whole Lenovo acquisition, and now with Meraki.
Now, see, now that kind of,
pissing on that whole
but see,
road.
that disturbed me a little bit because when View 4.6 came out, that's when they killed that whole idea. They weren't going to do a Type 1 hypervisor. That was a big deal with VMware. They said, we're not going to do it. No way in hell. We're sticking with View. We're going to do VDI. If you want multiple machines, we got Lab Manager. We got this, you know, blah, blah, blah. But we're not, I mean, Paul Moritz stood up on stage and said, this is not what we're going to do. Now they come in with that acquisition and they're kind of like, oh, huh, shit, this might be a good idea. You know?
Well, Lenovo is not a Type 1 hypervisor, is it?
No, it's not. But it does the same premise of what they said they wouldn't do before. You know, it's getting to that
Serves the
same,
same use.
serves the same use, yes.
Well, they don't get
Right.
client computing.
They don't get it at all. They're server people. They're not client. Whoops, I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, they kill, yeah.
Really confused when you had that lousy VMware promote, which they said did the same thing, didn't do the same thing, and you couldn't get. I remember Maris saying that.
Yeah.
Also, we were talking to people internal to VMware and saying, look, guys, we were just about to pull the trigger on Ace, and it's really good at people needs. We pulled it. What are you going to do?
Right.
And they were saying, well, yeah, we've got stuff in the pipeline, this and that and the other, and constantly renaming all their products and acquiring things and putting them down. And it was like,
Right.
guess what VMware are going to do next by who they're going to acquire next. The Lenovo thing is interesting. I think is part of that whole arc. There's a story arc going on that we're not privy to.
Originally, though, the developers that I had talked to at the time were talking about taking, they wanted to morph it off the View product.
Yeah.
They didn't want it to be part of any other, they wanted it to be part of the whole desktop platform, view, thin app, you know, that whole thing. Yeah, exactly.
The redheaded bastard stepchild.
Yeah, so now it's something, it's totally, it's like its own animal. Now that they've got the Lenovo, they've got, you know.
They're not talking to each other. So they've
Yeah.
got the idea of what they want to do, but there's different bits of them doing different stuff trying to get there.
Yeah, Microsoft is kind of like that too.
They're not even cross-pollinating anymore.
Yeah, Microsoft is kind of like that too. Just, you know, they don't, sometimes they go like this and they miss each other and they, just kidding, sorry. I apologize, she's telling me I'm out of time. Does anybody have any more questions? Okay, thank you very much. Please fill out the surveys. Thank you.